The eviction notice was taped crooked to my front door, the red ink stamp bleeding through the cheap paper like it was meant to scare me into silence. It wasn't from some stranger or a greedy landlord. It was from my own son, Ryan. His signature, messy, rushed, but undeniably his, stared back at me. And standing behind him, holding the roll of tape, was his wife, Kayla, smirking like she'd just won the lottery. If you're watching this, subscribe and comment where you're watching from. That's the first thing I need to say, because when I tell you a story like this, it's not just mine. It's about every parent who's given too much, every family who's seen loyalty turn into leverage. I stood there on the front porch of the duplex I had co-signed for, my key still warm in my hand, and I couldn't believe the boundary my son had just crossed. This wasn't just a property. It was my security, my retirement cushion, the place I thought would keep me close to my only child. And now, after everything I had sacrificed, extra night shifts, skipped vacations, even dipping into my retirement account, Ryan was pushing me out like I was a stranger on his doorstep. Neighbors peeked out from their curtains, some pretending to water plants, others lingering a little too long with their trash bins. The humiliation stung deeper than the Ohio winter air biting my cheeks. "Mom, it's just business," Ryan muttered, his eyes avoiding mine. "But Kayla." She leaned against the porch post and said loud enough for the whole street to hear, "You'll land on your feet. It's time we had our own space." Her words weren't just cold, they were calculated. They wanted me gone, fast, before I could realize what was really happening behind the scenes. But here's the thing, when someone pushes you into a corner, you learn to fight with tools you never thought you'd use. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. Instead, I folded the notice, slid it into my purse, and walked back inside one last time. My coffee mug sat on the counter. The air still smelled faintly of cinnamon from the rolls I'd baked that morning. I took one slow look around and thought, if this is how they want it, then they better be ready for what's coming next. If that sounds harsh, here's how we got there. I didn't always think of myself as someone who'd fight back. For most of my 62 years, I was the one smoothing things over, keeping the peace, making sure everyone else had what they needed. It was a habit I'd picked up as a nurse: smile through the chaos, steady the room even when your own hands were shaking. At work, that made me dependable. At home, it made me easy to take for granted. That night, after the eviction notice, I sat at the small dinette table in my unit of the duplex. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence, the same way it always had when I came home from long shifts at Riverside Hospital. My hands curled around a chipped coffee mug, the kind you get free at a blood drive, and I stared at the steam rising from it like the answers might be written there. How had it come to this? In Columbus, life had been steady, if not exciting. Retired life wasn't glamorous, but I had my routines. Morning walks at Antrim Park when the geese were still quiet, Sunday groceries at Kroger, where I clipped coupons and complained about the price of milk like everyone else, occasional lunches at Bob Evans with my neighbor, Marlene. Nothing fancy, but enough to keep me grounded. And then there was Ryan. My only son. My pride, my investment. I raised him alone after his dad walked out when Ryan was 10. Every school trip, every doctor's visit, every scraped knee, that was all me. When he said he wanted to start a business, I didn't hesitate. I pulled from my 401k and co-signed the duplex so he could live upstairs and rent out my side for income. I told myself it was worth it to see him stand on his own feet. But here's the flaw I carried: I thought sacrificing boundaries was the same as showing love. I thought giving more, time, money, forgiveness, was proof that I was doing right by him. What I didn't see, not at first, was that Ryan had learned to lean on me like a crutch. And Kayla, well, she saw the situation as something else entirely, an opportunity. As I sipped my coffee, the cinnamon rolls from that morning sat untouched on the counter. I'd baked them for Ryan, a small tradition that went back to his high school football days. Win or lose, he always came home to warm rolls. Now they just sat there, cold and ignored, much like me. The eviction notice wasn't just a piece of paper, it was a mirror. It reflected every time I'd swallowed my pride to keep the peace. Every, "Sure, I'll cover it," when Ryan needed a bill paid. Every, "It's fine, don't worry about me," when Kayla made a cutting remark about how I dressed or how often I called. What hurt most wasn't the loss of a roof. I could find another place, I had friends, and I knew how to stretch a budget. What gutted me was the realization that Ryan didn't see me as a mother anymore. He saw me as an obstacle, or worse, a liability. That kind of betrayal, it doesn't just sting. It rearranges how you see the world. And yet, even in that low moment, I felt something shift. Maybe it was the hum of the fridge or the flicker of the streetlight outside, but I heard this small, stubborn voice inside me: "This isn't the end. This is the line." I didn't know then how far I'd go, or how many battles I'd have to fight on paper instead of in person. But I did know this: I couldn't keep living under the misbelief that love meant letting yourself be walked on. Still, the fear was real. I wasn't naive about the stakes. Rent in Columbus wasn't cheap, not for retirees living on pensions and Social Security. Apartments downtown ran $1,200 or more for one-bedroom units. Even in the suburbs, Hilliard, Gahanna, you'd be lucky to find anything under $1,000. My savings weren't endless. If Ryan really pushed me out, I'd be scraping by on the edge of survival. That reality pressed down hard as I traced the edge of the eviction notice tucked in my purse. My stomach turned, a mix of anger and nausea. The part of me that had always forgiven wanted to march upstairs, knock on Ryan's door, and beg him to reconsider. But another part, the one that had held a patient's hand through their last breath, the one that had survived single motherhood in the Midwest, knew better. Begging wasn't going to save me. Something else would. Something quieter, smarter, lawful. If I was going to survive this and hold on to my dignity, I needed to look at the world the way Kayla did, as a chessboard. Every document, every clause, every bank slip was a piece I could move. And if I played it right, maybe I could turn the whole game on them. But the truth didn't start that night. It started months earlier. Ryan used to come home from school with grass stains on his jeans and a grin that could melt even the worst day at work. I still remember one October Friday night. He must have been 14, standing in the stands at his high school football game with a thermos of cocoa, cheering until my throat was raw. He wasn't the star quarterback, just a lineman, but you'd think he'd won the Super Bowl with how proud I was. Afterward, we drove through White Castle on Olentangy, ordered a sack of sliders, and talked about nothing and everything. Back then, it was just us. Me working doubles at Riverside Hospital, him juggling homework and practice. Money was tight. Mortgage, medical bills, groceries. I remember stretching spaghetti sauce with canned tomatoes just to make it last one more night. But I never let Ryan see the strain. My misbelief, that peace mattered more than boundaries, meant I gave him the best even if it cost me sleep and security. When he graduated from Ohio State with a business degree, I thought my sacrifices had finally paid off. "I'll make you proud, Mom," he said at the ceremony, hugging me in that sweaty gown. And I believed him. Kayla entered the picture a year later. She was polished in a way we weren't used to, highlighted hair, acrylic nails, always talking about networking and scaling like life was one long boardroom pitch. She worked at a marketing firm downtown, and from the start, I could tell she had ambition like fire. I didn't dislike her, not at first. She was funny, quick with a joke, and I wanted Ryan happy. But there was something about the way she sized me up, like she was calculating my worth in dollars and cents. When Ryan and Kayla got engaged, they invited me to brunch at First Watch. I still remember the way Kayla laid out the opportunity like it was a business plan. "We want to buy a duplex on the north side. Live in the upstairs, rent out the downstairs. but we'll need a co-signer to secure the mortgage. Banks like stability, and with your credit, it'll be a sure thing. I should have said no. I should have asked harder questions. Instead, I said, of course. That's what moms are for. That's how I ended up signing papers at Huntington Bank on a gray Tuesday morning. The numbers felt big, $285,000 for the property, but Ryan squeezed my hand and said, "It's an investment, Mom. You'll see." And at first, it did feel like an investment. The duplex wasn't fancy, 2 brick units with narrow porches, just off High Street near Clintonville, but it was solid. I moved into the lower unit, cozy with 2 bedrooms and an outdated kitchen I didn't mind. Ryan and Kayla took the top floor. The plan was simple: I'd pay a reduced rent, Ryan would cover the mortgage with his business income, and we'd all build equity together. But then the cracks started showing. Ryan's business, consulting for small companies, wasn't as steady as he'd hoped. Some months he had clients, other months he scrambled. Kayla picked up the slack with her salary, but she didn't hide her resentment. I'd hear the arguments through the floorboards: "Your mom's rent isn't enough to cover expenses. She's family, Kayla. Family doesn't pay half." One Saturday, Kayla came downstairs uninvited. She leaned against my counter, eyeing the stew bubbling on the stove. "You know, Linda, market rent for this unit would be at least $1,200. You're paying less than half that. Ryan's too nice to say it, but it puts us in a bind." I swallowed the sting and said, "I can pitch in a little more when I get my pension check." She smiled, tight, triumphant, and left without touching the stew. From then on, things shifted. Invitations to dinner upstairs dried up. Ryan stopped calling me Mom in front of Kayla. It was just Linda. At Christmas, instead of exchanging thoughtful gifts, they gave me a $25 Target card. Practical, yes, but it felt like a statement. Still, I kept giving. I babysat their dog when they traveled. I lent Ryan $500 when his car needed new tires. I even baked cinnamon rolls every Sunday, setting a plate aside for them. Most weekends, it went untouched. Then came the refinance. I was sorting mail one afternoon when I noticed an envelope addressed to Ryan from Fifth Third Bank. I thought nothing of it, until a week later, another arrived marked, "Important loan documents." Something in my gut told me to ask. When I mentioned it over coffee, Ryan brushed it off. "Just business stuff, Mom." Kayla, though, stiffened. Her nails tapped the mug like Morse code. I let it go. That was my mistake. Because a month later, I overheard them upstairs arguing again. Kayla's voice was sharp, slicing through the ceiling. "She'll never know you forged it if you keep your mouth shut. The bank approved it. We're fine." My heart stopped. I didn't want to believe it. Surely my son wouldn't forge my name on financial documents. Surely he wouldn't risk everything we'd built for a few $1,000s. But doubt crept in, like a draft under a locked door. The final straw came that cold January morning when the eviction notice landed on my door. Signed by Ryan. Smirked over by Kayla. It wasn't just about space. It was about control. About removing me before I could discover what they'd done. I sat in my kitchen that night with the eviction notice folded in my purse and the stew still warm on the stove. My phone buzzed with a text from Marlene down the street. "You okay? Saw Kayla outside earlier." I didn't answer. Instead, I pulled out the mortgage paperwork I'd kept in a file cabinet. My name was right there, bold on the co-signer line. And suddenly, those envelopes from the bank, Kayla's comment about market rent, Ryan's evasiveness, they weren't just irritations. They were clues. Clues that the game I thought we were playing, family helping family, wasn't the real game at all. Which brings us to the plan I should have made sooner. The day I realized I couldn't play peacekeeper anymore was the day I saw Ryan's face as he slipped the key out of my hand. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even guilt. It was relief, like he'd finally gotten rid of a burden he'd been dragging behind him. And I thought, after everything, that's what I am to him. A burden. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a mug of black coffee and the eviction notice spread out flat like a battle map. The house was quiet, too quiet, but my mind wasn't. Every memory, every sacrifice I'd made for Ryan, pressed down on me like weights. The years of overtime. The loans. Signing papers I didn't fully understand because he said, "Trust me." And for the first time, the anger that I had been swallowing for years finally boiled over. I slammed my palm against the table so hard the mug rattled. My hands shook, not from weakness, but from clarity. No more cinnamon rolls on Sundays. No more handouts. No more silence. I wasn't just being evicted from my home. I was being erased from my own story, reduced to a footnote in Ryan and Kayla's version of success. They wanted me gone because they thought I was disposable. But they'd forgotten who they were dealing with. I wasn't some tenant they could bully. I was the co-signer. My name was on every single one of those mortgage documents. Legally, that duplex wasn't just theirs. It was mine. That realization was like striking a match in a dark room. I pulled out the old metal file box I kept under my bed and spread the documents across the table. Mortgage agreement. Deed copy. Tax forms. My signature, clear as day. And then I saw something else, another loan Ryan had refinanced last year. The signature looked like mine, but the D in Linda curled in a way I never wrote it. Forged. My chest tightened. Forging a co-signer's name. That wasn't just wrong. It was fraud. Jail-time fraud. For a moment, I felt sick. My own son had done this. The boy I raised, the boy I thought I knew. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. And then I made a decision that would change everything. I was done being the victim in this story. I grabbed a yellow legal pad and started writing. Step 1, confirm the forgery. Step 2, make copies of everything. Step 3, find out exactly what Ryan and Kayla had done behind my back. The more I wrote, the steadier my hands became. But underneath the determination, there was a hollow ache. I thought about Ryan at 14, grinning with those White Castle sliders in his lap, telling me he'd always take care of me one day. I thought about the promise he made at graduation. When did that boy disappear? Or had I blinded myself to who he really was all along? The hardest part wasn't planning revenge. It was letting go of the fantasy that love alone would keep Ryan loyal. Around midnight, I stood at the window, looking out at the duplex front yard, the frost glinting under the street lamp. Upstairs, I could see the faint blue light of a TV flashing through their curtains. Kayla's laughter drifted down faintly, sharp as glass. I pressed my hand to the cold glass and whispered, "You shouldn't have underestimated me." Because that was their biggest mistake. They thought eviction was the end of my story. But in truth, it was just the breaking point, the spark that would light the fuse. And I already knew, when this fuse burned down, the explosion would leave them wishing they'd never taped that notice to my door. The first step of any good counterattack is silence. I didn't storm upstairs. I didn't shout. I didn't let them see that I knew anything. Instead, I went about my days as though nothing had changed. I kept baking cinnamon rolls on Sundays, left the extra plate on the counter, and even forced myself to smile when Kayla passed me in the driveway. Let them think they'd won. Let them underestimate me further. Meanwhile, I was busy building my case. I started with the forged loan documents. One Friday morning, I went downtown to Fifth Third Bank, wearing my best blazer, the navy one I used to wear for hospital reviews. I asked to speak with the loan officer whose name was on the paperwork. The young man, barely older than Ryan, pulled up the file. I slid my driver's license across the desk and asked him, very calmly, "Can you compare my signature on that document to the one on my ID?" He frowned. Leaned closer. His eyes flicked between the two signatures. "Ma'am, this doesn't look identical." I leaned back, folding my hands in my lap, letting the silence press down. Finally, I said, "That's because it's not mine." His Adam's apple bobbed. He promised to review internally, which was corporate speak for "we're in trouble if this is true." I thanked him, collected a copy of the loan, and left without another word. That was the first domino. The second came from a different direction, the neighbors. In tight-knit Clintonville, gossip spreads faster than crabgrass, and Kayla had made herself plenty of enemies with her sharp tongue. At the corner store, Marlene let slip that she'd seen a parade of realtors going in and out of the duplex upstairs. Apparently, Ryan and Kayla weren't just trying to evict me, they were preparing to sell the entire property. And here's the catch: they couldn't legally sell without my consent. My name was still on the mortgage. I walked home that night with a slow, deliberate smile. They were planning their big win, and they didn't even realize the foundation of their plan was rotten. But things got messier before they got better. Kayla must have sensed my silence. One evening, she appeared at my door, arms folded, fake sweet smile plastered across her face. "Linda, I hope you're settling things. Ryan and we really need you out by the end of the month." I tilted my head. "Funny. Last I checked, my name's still on the deed." Her smile faltered for just a second, but then she leaned closer, lowering her voice to a hiss. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. We can make life very unpleasant if you drag this out." I didn't flinch. I simply said, "Do what you have to do," and closed the door. Inside, though, my stomach twisted. Because as much as I wanted to play the game coolly, the truth was I had no idea how far they'd go. And Kayla. She struck me as someone who'd stop at nothing if it meant money and control. Over the next week, small things began to happen. My mail went missing. The shared Wi-Fi password stopped working. One morning, I came outside to find a bright orange, "For rent," sign stuck in my yard, advertising my unit. It wasn't subtle. It was intimidation. But here's what they didn't know: I was already 2 steps ahead. I had taken all the documents, the forged loan, the mortgage contract, even text messages where Ryan admitted I'd co-signed, and copied them at the library. One said I kept it home. Another said I mailed in a sealed envelope to my cousin David, a paralegal in Cleveland. "Hold on to this," I told him. "If something happens, open it." The more Kayla pushed, the calmer I became. Because the tighter she squeezed, the clearer the cracks in her plan appeared. Then came the biggest complication of all: Ryan. Late one night, as I was washing dishes, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find him alone, shoulders slumped, eyes darting. He looked like the boy I used to know, the one who stayed up late studying at the kitchen table. "Mom," he whispered, "I didn't want it to go this far." I set the towel down, searching his face. "Then why did you let it?" He rubbed his hands together, voice cracking. "Kayla, she says this is the only way. We're in too deep with the refinance. If the bank finds out, we'll lose everything. The house, my business." He swallowed hard. "I'll lose her." For a fleeting moment, my heart softened. That was the complication I hadn't counted on. Ryan wasn't just greedy. He was scared. He was trapped by Kayla's ambition and his own cowardice. But pity doesn't erase betrayal. I looked him in the eye and said, "You didn't just risk your business, Ryan. You risked me. And that's something I won't forgive easily." He left without another word, but I saw the conflict in his eyes. Kayla might have been the architect, but Ryan had signed the blueprints. The following days turned into a chess game. Kayla moved aggressively, pushing notices under my door, parading realtors through the upstairs unit, even filing a complaint with the HOA claiming I was a disruptive tenant. Each move she made, I countered quietly. Copies of every notice. Photos of every realtor's car parked outside. A neat little folder growing thicker by the day. But every chess game has a point where pawns aren't enough. You have to bring out the queen. And my queen. That was the discovery I made on a rainy Wednesday, flipping through county property records online. Buried in the paperwork, clear as daylight, was the refinancing loan, filed with my forged signature. Not just one, but two. Fraud. Felony level. I sat back in my chair, the rain tapping the window like a drumbeat. For weeks, I'd been playing defense. But with this, the board flipped. They thought eviction was their power play, but now, I held the winning piece. Still, complications swirled in my chest. Turning in my own son meant burning the last bridge between us. There'd be no coming back, no Sunday dinners, no White Castle drives. It would destroy him. But if I didn't, he and Kayla would sell the house, pocket the profits, and leave me with nothing. The eviction notice had pushed me to the breaking point. But this was the moment I realized the battle wasn't just about a home. It was about my dignity. My survival. And whether Ryan deserved the shield of my silence, or the sword of my truth. And once that choice crystallized in my mind, there was no unmaking it. I was done being their pawn. It was time to become the player they never saw coming. The rain hadn't stopped all night, hammering against the duplex like it wanted to wash everything away. I sat at my kitchen table, the folder of evidence spread open in front of me, mortgage documents, bank records, photos, even the forged signatures. The yellow lamp threw a warm glow over the papers, but all I felt was cold resolve. This was it. The point of no return. I had spent weeks reacting, dodging Kayla's blows, letting Ryan's silence cut me deeper than words. But staring at those documents, I realized I wasn't just holding proof. I was holding power. And power feels different when you've been powerless for so long. The shift came the moment I stopped asking myself whether I could forgive Ryan and started asking whether I should protect myself. That tiny change flipped the whole board. Because if I kept playing defense, I'd lose everything, my home, my dignity, maybe even my future. But if I went on offense, they had everything to lose. The next morning, I put on that navy blazer again, clipped my hair back, and walked into the Franklin County Clerk's office with the folder tucked under my arm. The clerk, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, barely glanced at me when she asked, "What are you filing?" "Mortgage fraud," I said simply. And when I set those papers on the counter, my hands didn't tremble. That single act was my midpoint shift, not just collecting evidence, but weaponizing it. I wasn't keeping quiet anymore. As I walked out of the courthouse, something strange happened. For the first time since the eviction notice appeared, I felt taller. Lighter. Like I'd stepped out of the role they'd shoved me into, the meek, disposable mother, and stepped into something fiercer. That night, I cooked a small pot of chili, poured myself a glass of wine, and waited. It didn't take long. Around 9, Ryan knocked at the door. His face was pale, drawn tight with worry. "Mom," he whispered, "did you go to the bank?" I met his eyes and didn't blink. "I went to more than the bank, Ryan." His throat worked as he swallowed. "Kayla's furious. She said if you keep this up, she'll—" He broke off, rubbing his face with his hands. "You don't understand. If this gets out, I could lose everything." I leaned across the table, my voice steady as stone. "You should have thought about that before you forged my name." For once, Ryan didn't have a retort. He just stared at me, the weight of his choices pressing down. And in that silence, I understood something crucial: he wasn't in control anymore. I was. The woman who walked into that courthouse was not the same woman who'd signed away her savings for her son's dream. She wasn't the same woman who baked cinnamon rolls, hoping love alone would be enough. This new woman, me, had drawn a line in permanent ink. And Ryan, Kayla, the neighbors, the bank, everyone was about to learn what happened when a mother who'd given everything finally decided she had nothing left to lose. The battle wasn't over, but the board had shifted. I wasn't just surviving eviction anymore. I was turning it into the very weapon that could bring their empire of lies crashing down. The second half of the story had begun. I moved like someone who had finally learned to read the rulebook. No theatrics. No revenge posting. Just paperwork, timestamps, and receipts. First, I got the signature comparison in writing. After my quiet visit to Fifth Third, the loan officer called back and set up an appointment. He printed the loan file, marked the pages, and gave me a copy stamped with an internal review number. That piece of paper, Customer File Review #F3-4829, was little to a bank clerk, huge to me. I took it straight to a notary public at the downtown UPS store and had an affidavit notarized, my statement that the signature was forged and I never authorized the refinance. It cost me $20 and 5 minutes of my dignity. Next, I filed a police report. I walked into the North Precinct, talked to Officer Ramirez, and handed him the affidavit and copies of the loan documents. He typed into his computer while I watched, asked me dates, asked me to point out the differences in my handwriting. "We'll open an investigation," he said, and gave me the incident number, CPD 2025-01742, which I wrote on the top of my folder like a badge. While the police opened their case, I went to the Franklin County Recorder's office. If Ryan and Kayla tried to sell or refinance again, I wanted the title chain to show there was a shadow on the property. So I prepared and recorded a formal notice of claim, what title companies might later call a notice of dispute or lease pendens, attaching my affidavit and noting the pending criminal investigation. The recorder stamped it with the date and a recording number. Suddenly, any buyer's title search would throw up a red flag. The filing fee was modest, less than $50, but the effect was immediate. I also sent certified letters, return receipt requested, to Ryan, Kayla, and the mortgage servicer. Each letter was a clear, unemotional demand: rescind the refinance, produce original signed documents for my review, or we proceed with criminal charges and civil remedies. I mailed them via the Columbus Post Office and kept the tracking numbers in my ledger: 7009 3230 0001 2345 6789, to Ryan, 7009 3230 0001 2345 6796, to Kayla, 7009 3230 0001 2345 6802, to the bank. The receipts came back a few days later, signatures on the green cards, and I filed them with my copies. At the same time, I made a consumer complaint with the Ohio Department of Commerce and a fraud complaint with the bank's Consumer Relations Department. There's a rhythm to these things: forms to fill, check boxes to tick, case numbers to memorize. I printed each confirmation and taped them in order inside my folder so the chronology would be obvious if anyone tried to gaslight the facts away. I didn't stop at officials. I went to my cousin David, the paralegal, and asked him to draft a short demand letter on letterhead I could file in small claims court if necessary. He wrote it tight and legal sounding, demanding rescission and repayment of any wrongfully taken funds. He also told me, in plain language, what I might expect at the prosecutor's office and the small claims counter: timelines, possible fees, and the thin arithmetic of what a court would likely award. It comforted me to hear the mechanics out loud: next steps, step by step. Then I filed a civil notice with the county clerk, a prospective small claims complaint reserving my right to seek restitution for any rent, damages, and costs. Filing the complaint required a form, 2 copies, and a filing fee. The clerk stamped it with a court date roughly 6 weeks out, long enough for negotiations, short enough to keep pressure on them. Every move had a record. Every record had a stamp. Every stamp was a small victory. I also took practical steps to protect myself. I changed shared account passwords, put alerts on my bank accounts for any new activity, and arranged to have certified mail routed through a P.O. box so nothing could be intercepted. I called my bank's fraud hotline and opened a fraud alert on my credit profile, procedures that felt intrusive and oddly comforting at the same time. At night, when the house settled, I'd crossed things off the yellow pad. Called bank, check. Police report, check. Lease pendants recorded, check. Certified letters sent, check. Each completed task turned my raw anger into precise leverage. And then I waited, until the next domino fell, or I pushed the next one. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. For a few weeks, it seemed like I'd finally regained control. The certified mail receipts were tucked neatly in my folder. The Franklin County Recorder's stamp glared back at me like a warning siren for anyone sniffing around the property. Even the bank's fraud department had called to confirm my complaint was logged under case number #F3-4927. I thought I'd boxed Ryan and Kayla into a corner so tight they'd have no choice but to back down. For the first time in months, I slept through the night. I even started humming to myself in the kitchen, frying bacon like I used to when Ryan was a boy. For a moment, I believed the worst was behind me. That illusion cracked on a Wednesday morning. A thick envelope slid through my mail slot. I slid it open and nearly dropped it when I saw the letterhead, Law Offices of Daniel Foster, Attorney at Law. Daniel wasn't just any attorney, he was Kayla's older brother. I remembered meeting him once at a barbecue, his handshake too firm, his smile just a little too polished. The letter was a formal response, dripping with intimidation. It accused me of harassment, trespassing, and deliberate interference with lawful financing. It warned me that if I didn't withdraw my claims and notices, they'd pursue damages against me. The language was sharp, like a blade pressed just close enough to draw blood without cutting. My heart pounded as I read it again. For all my careful paperwork, the idea of being dragged into court as a defendant rattled me. I knew it was bluster, but the thought of paying for an attorney, of standing alone against Kayla's well-connected family, shook my confidence. I tried to steady myself. "This is what bullies do," I muttered, clutching the letter. "They bluff loud." Still, my hands trembled as I set it in the folder. 2 days later, another blow landed. I received a notice from the county clerk's office about a lien filed against my name. According to the document, I supposedly owed nearly $11,000 in shared household expenses and debts, dating back years. The claim listed Ryan as the filer. My own son had filed a lien against me, using fabricated numbers, padded bills, and so-called care costs he claimed to have fronted while I lived in the duplex. It wasn't just a piece of paper. A lien meant any property in my name could be tangled in legal disputes until it was cleared. It meant my credit was poisoned even further. I felt the air drain out of me as I realized, not only was I fighting to clear my name, but they were actively painting me as the villain. The neighborhood chatter didn't help. I overheard my next-door neighbor, Mrs. Jeffries, whispering to another woman on the sidewalk, "It's so sad. Ryan says his mom's losing it. Something about her trying to take the house out from under them." Heat rushed to my face. They were spinning a story that I was bitter, senile, out of touch. And people were buying it. For years I'd been Nurse Linda, always ready to lend a hand. Now I was being recast as a meddling old woman who couldn't let go. I tried leaning on my cousin David for reassurance, but even he grew cautious. "Linda, I'll help however I can," he said one night over the phone, "but if Kayla's brother really pushes this into litigation, I can't represent you. I'm not licensed here." And you'd be up against a real machine. His words were gentle, but the subtext was clear: you may be on your own. The worst moment came the following week when the mortgage servicer sent me a terse letter: pending investigation, we will continue to honor the current loan terms. Translation: until the fraud case was resolved, they were siding with Ryan and Kayla. My notice of claim had put a cloud on the title, but the bank wasn't pulling the plug. Not yet. It felt like I'd climbed halfway up a mountain only to watch the peak crumble higher and farther away. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at my yellow pad. For every neat checkmark, there were now red question marks: attorney threats, fake lien, public opinion turning, bank stalling. My victories were turning to ash. I poured myself a cup of black coffee even though it was nearly 10 p.m. The bitter taste grounded me. I whispered aloud, almost like a prayer, what am I missing? And that's when I thought back to the fat file the bank had copied for me. I hadn't read every page, just the signature lines. My eyes landed on the folder resting on the counter. Could it be possible that somewhere in those pages was the key? Fear gave way to curiosity. I opened the folder and began flipping, page by page. Insurance riders, amortization schedules, correspondence slips. Most of it dense and boring. But then, tucked halfway through, one line caught my eye. One line in an old message changed everything. The line was buried in the middle of an email chain between the loan officer and the mortgage servicer. I almost skimmed past it, but the phrasing snagged my attention. Per borrower's request, forward all notices to secondary address, 1947 Bryson Avenue. I froze. Bryson Avenue wasn't my address. It wasn't even in my neighborhood. I knew it immediately: it was Kayla's parents' house across town. My pulse thudded. If the bank had been sending refinancing notices and payment statements there instead of my duplex, I never would have seen a single page. They'd cut me out of the loop deliberately. And the kicker: the borrower's request had my name typed in the signature block. I sat back in my chair, the hum of my refrigerator suddenly sounding louder than the whole world. Ryan hadn't just strong-armed me with eviction. He and Kayla had rerouted official mail to cover their tracks. That was more than shady, it was evidence of intent. I flipped further and found a scanned form: change of correspondence address, with my name printed neatly at the top. The signature at the bottom looked like mine, but I recognized the telltale difference: the looping D in Linda was wrong. Kayla's handwriting had always curled inward on her D's, like a closed eye. She must have filled it out, thinking no one would notice. The realization hit me like cold water. This wasn't just Ryan being careless with money. This was a coordinated scheme to erase me from the paper trail, to make me invisible on documents where my rights still mattered. I thought back to the lien Ryan filed against me for household expenses. At the time it had felt like a low blow, but now it looked like part of the same pattern: bury me under enough bogus paperwork that I'd drown in it, too overwhelmed to fight back. For a moment, sorrow welled up in me, sorrow deeper than the anger. My own son, the boy I'd rocked to sleep through Ohio thunderstorms, had signed off on treating me like an obstacle to be erased. Kayla, clever and sharp, had weaponized paperwork as easily as I once wielded a stethoscope. But here's the thing about paperwork: it cuts both ways. That single line in the bank's email, per borrower's request, wasn't just an inconvenience. It was proof of fraud. A forged signature. A false address. A rerouting of federally regulated loan correspondence. I realized I didn't just have a family squabble anymore. I had a case that touched federal mail statutes and state fraud laws. The power shifted in my chest. Not completely. I was still one woman in a modest Columbus kitchen with nothing but a yellow pad and a folder of copies, but enough. Enough to make me sit up straighter and pick up my pen. I wrote down what I now knew. Forgery of refinance documents, my signature falsified. Fraudulent lien filed, inflated household debt invented by Ryan. Mail rerouting with forged request, intentional concealment of notices. Together, they painted a pattern too obvious for even Kayla's brother to spin. I thought about my allies. David might not be able to argue in court, but he'd know how to package evidence cleanly. Officer Ramirez at the precinct already had my first affidavit. This would bolster his report. And the wild card, yes, the county recorder's office. With that fraudulent address form attached to the loan, any title company would now view the whole property as radioactive. The memory of Kayla's brother's letter drifted back, all threats, no substance. But if I could present these documents clearly, signature inconsistencies, false address forms, mailed notices redirected, it wouldn't matter how polished his suit was. Courts care about documents, not barbecue smiles. I exhaled slowly, the way I used to before inserting an 4. Calm hands, steady heart. That's when the thought clicked into place. I didn't need to prove Ryan was cruel, or Kayla manipulative. I only needed to prove they had lied in writing. The difference between suspicion and evidence is a single page. And I finally had mine. I closed the folder, but this time, it wasn't with dread. It was with resolve. Now I knew exactly where to stand. Once I had the smoking line, per borrower's request, forward all notices to 1947 Bryson Avenue, everything else snapped into place. Paperwork is a tidy thing. When you collect it, stamp it, and line it up in order, it tells a story that's hard to argue with. I started by delivering a single, simple packet, my notarized affidavit, the bank emails with the rerouting instruction, copies of the forged refinance forms, the recorded lease pendants, the police report number from Officer Ramirez, and a clean chronology written on my yellow legal pad. I made 3 copies, one for the county prosecutor, one for the mortgage servicer's fraud department, and one I kept for myself. Each packet was identical, orderly, and impossible to ignore. The prosecutor's office took it seriously. I don't know what I expected, glossy sympathy and a shrug, but instead I found a woman with a stack of case files and a clear pen. Assistant Prosecutor Michaels flipped through everything and asked the kind of questions a professional asks: dates, witnesses, motive, whether the defendants had been confronted. I handed over my certified mail receipts, the 5th third review number, and the bank's internal memorandum. She called it compelling evidence of intent to defraud. Within a week, my civil paper trail had triggered a criminal referral. At the bank, the fraud department moved slower but not negligently. They opened a formal investigation and, crucially, froze any pending changes on the loan. The mortgage servicer's legal team contacted me and asked for a meeting. I walked into that conference room with my cousin David beside me, his calm presence steadied me, and a folder that felt heavier than any purse I'd carried in decades. The bank reviewed the signatures, compared timestamps, and agreed to rescind the refinance pending the outcome of their investigation. In plain language, they would reverse any transactions done on the strength of the forged documents and would not honor any attempted sale while the lease pendants stood. Their title department put a temporary hold on the property file. Then the public accountability ladder started to climb. I sent a factual, evidence-backed summary to Kayla's HR department, not to smear her, but because she worked for a firm whose clients demanded ethical behavior. I included only the documents and dates, no speculation. HR opened an internal inquiry and placed Kayla on administrative leave while they verified the claims. Within days, a small marketing firm that relied on reputation had to act. I wasn't trying to ruin her career, but truth has consequences in the world of client trust. And there was Ryan. The most painful part was how quickly his bravado dissolved when real institutions began to ask real questions. He called me once, voice raw, "Mom, I didn't think it would come to this." I told him, calmly, what I'd told him before, what he already knew, about forged signatures and lines you don't cross. I also told him, honestly, that the choice to sign his name to my life had consequences he'd asked for when he decided to hide things from me. Legally, the machine turned in predictable ways. The prosecutor convened a meeting and, seeing the evidence, offered Ryan a deal: plea to a felony-adjacent charge reduced to a misdemeanor, fraud in the first instance, restitution, community service, and probation, if he agreed to full cooperation and to sign an agreement withdrawing the fraudulent documents and compensating me for legal and administrational costs. It wasn't mercy so much as the legal system doing its math, a plea that saved time and spared the public expense of a drawn-out felony trial. He took the deal. The bank rescinded the refinance. The false lien Ryan had filed was challenged and removed after documents proved it baseless. The recorded lease pendants remained long enough to block any sale until the title was cleared, and buyers backed away once they saw the public cloud on the property. Kayla's company, citing breach of ethics and client risk, placed her on unpaid suspension and opened a personnel review. Their marketing recruiter called me, awkward and apologetic, asking only for confirmation of facts. They didn't want rumors either. Emotionally, the moment was a collision of everything I'd feared and everything I'd hoped for. When the prosecutor called to tell me they'd accepted the plea offer, my breath left me. Adrenaline spiked, my palms went clammy, but then something else washed over me, a clear, careful calm. I felt like a surgeon after a successful operation, exhausted, but knowing you did no harm beyond what was necessary to heal. I remember sitting at the kitchen table that night, the same table where I'd once signed papers without reading them, and staring at Ryan's empty chair. The house smelled faintly of chili left from dinner, and the clock ticked loud in the thin silence. He would be on probation, paying restitution, and his credit would need repair. He would lose trust in the community and, for a long time, possibly in himself. Those were real costs, hard and deserved. But I didn't gloat. There was no triumphant speech. The revenge I'd sought was never about punishing for the scarce pleasure of saying, "I told you so." It was about restoring what was stolen: my name, my finances, my dignity. When the mortgage was put back into its prior state and the bank issued a correction notice to any reporting agencies that had been updated erroneously, I felt the world go right side up again. Calls came after that: the bank, the prosecutor, Kayla's HR, even neighbors who'd once whispered and now nodded on the sidewalk with apology in the way older people offer. Some called to chastise, others, to say they were sorry they'd believed the wrong side. Marlene brought over a plate of rolls and hugged me like we both had weathered a storm. It was humbling in a way I hadn't expected. The cost to Ryan was steep but fair. He had to do the work to rebuild trust. Kayla lost her immediate advantage. The duplex remained mine as long as I chose to keep it, but more importantly, I had set a boundary in ink and law that no one could quietly erase. The victory felt clean because it had been lawful, documented, and proportional. I'd used the systems built to protect people, banks, the prosecutor's office, title records, not to humiliate or break, but to hold accountable. In the end, I watched institutions do what they were supposed to do when presented with evidence: they corrected records, enforced rules, and assigned consequences. And in the quiet that followed, after the calls tapered and the files settled back into the drawer, I made myself a promise: I would keep my name at the top of my own papers from then on. Then came the calls. Fallout doesn't hit all at once, it trickles, then crashes. The first ripple came with Kayla. Her firm, after weeks of administrative review, announced she was being terminated for violating company policy. It wasn't just the forged paperwork, it was the fact that she had involved her employer's reputation by lying on financial forms while handling client accounts. The irony wasn't lost on me: she had tried to erase me from a property file, and in the end, she erased herself from a career. For Ryan, consequences were quieter but heavier. His misdemeanor plea meant no jail, but it meant probation, restitution, and public record. Employers could see it. Landlords could see it. Even neighbors could see it if they cared to search. He had to write me a restitution check every month, small amounts, steady and humiliating, and sit through financial responsibility courses ordered by the court. The lien he'd filed against me was struck down. The judge signed off, declaring it unsupported and fraudulent. Those were the exact words, unsupported and fraudulent. I almost clipped the ruling to the refrigerator like a child's drawing. But beneath the legal victories, the real fallout lived inside the relationships. Family gatherings fractured. My sister, who had always doted on Ryan, called me with a sigh, "Linda, he's ruined himself. But you did what you had to." We spoke quietly, but I could hear the disappointment in her voice, not for me, but for the boy she'd once bounced on her knee. Neighbors shifted, too. Those who had whispered now waved from their porches with guilty smiles. Some even brought baked goods, a silent offering of apology. I accepted them politely, but I never forgot their silence when rumors had painted me senile and vindictive. Trust, once cracked, doesn't seal clean. As for me, the duplex stayed mine. The bank corrected its records and froze Ryan out of any access. They issued a letter, short, clinical, affirming that all refinancing actions had been reversed due to fraudulent authorization. It was the kind of bureaucratic sentence that, to anyone else, would sound dull. To me, it felt like a vindication hymn. Still, there were scars. Ryan and I barely spoke. When we did, it was stiff, transactional, the checks in the mail. I finished my service hours. He didn't apologize outright, not yet. And maybe he never would. The wound of betrayal, especially when carved by your own child, doesn't heal with a single "I'm sorry." I learned to live with the quiet evenings differently. I picked up crosswords again. I walked Marlene's dog with her in the mornings. I started baking more than I ate, leaving loaves at the library and the fire station. Little by little, I filled the hollow that Ryan had once occupied. The financial fallout lingered, too. My credit report carried scars from the fraudulent refinance attempts, though the corrections began to filter in. I had to explain myself more than once when opening a new account. "No, that wasn't me. Here's the documentation." It was tedious, but each explanation reaffirmed the truth. And Ryan, he bore the quiet shame of being known. Columbus isn't a tiny town, but word travels fast enough. His co-workers looked at him differently. Kayla, bitter and unemployed, snapped at him in public once. I heard about it from Marlene's niece, who worked at the grocery store. They were unraveling, the way lies eventually do. The duplex, though, my small corner of brick and drywall, stood steady. I sat by the window some evenings, the sun painting long shadows over the street, and thought about the storm that had nearly swept it from me. I'd nearly lost my home, my dignity, my name. But through discipline and ink and a refusal to be erased, I had kept all three. The consequences were real: careers ended, reputations stained, relationships fractured. But there was also clarity. The dust settled on a truth that couldn't be denied. When pushed into a corner, I hadn't crumbled. I had fought back, not with fists or fury, but with paper, patience, and persistence. And in the aftermath, though lonelier, I was unbroken. I thought the dust had settled. The case was closed, the refinance reversed, the fraudulent lien erased. Ryan was on probation, Kayla was out of a job, and the duplex once again felt like mine. I believed the chapter had ended. Then the phone rang. It was Assistant Prosecutor Michaels. Her voice was steady, but the words landed like a hammer. "Mrs. Garrison, during discovery, additional documents came to light. You should know about them." I braced myself. The documents weren't about Ryan. They weren't even about Kayla. They were about me. Buried in the loan officer's files was another forged authorization form, this one from 5 years earlier, when Ryan had first persuaded me to co-sign a small line of credit to consolidate bills. At the time, I remembered signing only one document. But the bank now uncovered a second, tucked into the file, carrying my name and signature, opening a $15,000 personal credit line. That account had long since defaulted, been charged off, and sold to collections. The debt had been written against my credit profile for years without me even realizing it. The twist wasn't just that Ryan and Kayla had stolen from me recently. It was that they'd been doing it slowly, quietly, for much longer. The eviction was just the final, greedy crescendo. I sat at my kitchen table, the same place where I'd drafted my affidavits, and felt the air go out of me. The betrayal wasn't a single act, it was a pattern. My son hadn't just stumbled into fraud when Kayla pushed him, he'd been primed for it, maybe even practiced. And I had missed the signs. Michaels assured me the statute of limitations on prosecuting that earlier forgery had lapsed. But, she added, the discovery strengthens the narrative of intent. It shows this wasn't a one-time lapse. It was premeditated behavior. That helped, legally, but emotionally, it cut deeper. Knowing my son's willingness to cheat me hadn't sprung from desperation, but from habit, from comfort with deceit, changed everything. And then came the second twist. A week later, Ryan knocked on my door. He stood on the porch, shoulders slumped, probation paperwork in his hand. His voice cracked as he said, "Mom, I need to tell you something before you hear it from anyone else." I didn't invite him in, but I listened. He admitted, stammering, eyes wet, that the $15,000 line of credit years ago hadn't been for bills, or for Kayla, or even for himself. It had been for me. Not directly, but for my medical expenses after my knee surgery. The insurance had left a gap. He'd panicked, taken out credit in my name without telling me, then lost control of the repayments. By the time he confessed it to Kayla, she'd turned it into leverage. "If your mom never noticed, we can do more." That was the double edge. The earlier fraud had started from a place of care, twisted by fear and pride. But instead of coming clean, he'd buried it, let it rot, and let Kayla weaponize it into something far uglier. Standing there on my porch, Ryan looked more like the boy I raised than the man who betrayed me. But the truth was tangled. Did his initial act of desperation excuse the years of lies that followed? No. But did it explain how he'd been led deeper into deception? Maybe. The twist left me with no clean answers. Only the raw truth. Revenge had given me back my house, my dignity, my name. But it also revealed that beneath the fraud was a son who, in his own broken way, thought he was helping, and in trying to protect me, had destroyed the bond between us. It was justice. But it wasn't simple. If there's one thing this journey taught me, it's that betrayal doesn't always arrive with shouting or slammed doors. Sometimes it shows up quietly, dressed as paperwork, cloaked in fine print, hidden behind the people you love most. I used to think family loyalty was unshakable, that blood alone could keep bonds intact. I believed my son would never cross certain lines, because I had raised him with values of honesty, hard work, and compassion. But what I learned is harder, and sadder. Love doesn't exempt anyone from accountability. Ryan was my boy, my pride. And Kayla, whether I liked her or not, was his partner. Together, they made choices that nearly erased me from my own life. If I had stayed quiet out of fear of hurting family, they would have succeeded. And that's the trap so many fall into, silence for the sake of love, which turns into complicity in our own undoing. The truth is, standing up for yourself, especially against family, feels unnatural at first. It feels like betrayal in reverse. But protecting yourself isn't betrayal. It's survival. It's dignity. It's saying, I matter too. I also learned the quiet power of paper. Not glamorous weapons, not fiery confrontations, but pages, affidavits, receipts, records, and signatures. Institutions don't move for tears, or even outrage. They move for evidence. My greatest revenge wasn't a screaming match in the street, it was sliding a clean, orderly packet across a prosecutor's desk and watching the law recognize the truth. That was the cleanest form of justice, methodical, undeniable, and legal. It showed me that even when you feel small, if you organize your story into proof, the system can listen. But the deeper lesson, the one that lingers in the quiet, is about trust. I gave Ryan mine freely, blindly. I believed my love would be enough to hold him steady. But trust, I realized, isn't something to give away and forget. It's something you guard, nurture, and require accountability for, even with those closest to you. Because love without boundaries invites exploitation. And boundaries are not cruelty. They are protection, both for yourself and, ironically, for the people who might otherwise lose themselves in their own bad choices. What happened to me was devastating, but it also stripped away illusions. I see the world more clearly now. I know that family can fail you, and neighbors can believe rumors, but the truth, patient, documented truth, can still win. So the lesson is this: you are never too old, too small, or too dismissed to defend yourself. Whether you're 65 with a yellow legal pad or 25 with nothing but your word, you can stand tall when you root yourself in truth. And perhaps the bittersweet theme of my story is this: revenge isn't about destroying someone else. True revenge is reclaiming what they tried to take: your home, your reputation, your peace. When you win those back, clean and undeniable, you don't need to scream or gloat. The victory itself speaks louder than anger ever could. That's what I carry forward: quiet strength, clear boundaries, and the knowledge that even when family fails you, you don't have to fail yourself. The house feels different now. It's not just drywall and shingles, it's proof that I stood my ground. On quiet mornings, I sit at the same kitchen table where Ryan once shoved eviction papers toward me, my coffee steaming in its chipped mug. Back then, my hands trembled as I held those papers. Now, they rest steady on a stack of crossword puzzles, the light from the east-facing window spilling across the wood grain like a soft reminder: I'm still here. Sometimes I catch myself glancing at the door, half expecting Ryan to walk in like he used to, grinning, asking what was for dinner. Those days are gone. What remains is a calmer version of me, wiser, tougher, and strangely lighter. The silence that used to ache now feels like peace. The neighbors still wave when I water the flowers on the porch. Mrs. Parker from next door sometimes calls out, "Linda, your petunias are winning the block this year." I smile, knowing those small exchanges mean I'm more rooted here than I ever was when I let other people control my future. And that's the picture I want you to keep: a 62-year-old woman on a modest Columbus porch, her hands dirty from the soil, her heart finally clean from the burden of betrayal. The same house, but a different woman inside it. I don't pretend everything's perfect. The rift with Ryan may never fully heal. But what I gained is unshakable: the knowledge that I can protect myself, even when it hurts, even when the ones I love turn into strangers. And in a way, that's a kind of freedom I never expected to find so late in life. If this hit home, subscribe and tell me your state in the comments. Your story might be next.